Hi, my name is Sid Stewart, and this is the Bible Information Station where we learn unique facts about the Bible, different books of the Bible, different people, events of history, church history, and so forth. Thank you for joining us in this recording. We'd like to learn 25 facts concerning the Joseph that's a character in the book of Genesis in the Old Testament. Mary had a husband named Joseph in the Gospels of Matthew and Mark and Luke and John, but this is not the Joseph we're going to discuss or look at today. So this will be 25 unique facts about Joseph. Now, if you're not sure about the Bible, if you haven't read it much, please take time to read it. Read it casually, start with Genesis, work your way through Genesis, read through the Gospels, and you'll enjoy it very much. I became a Christian because I started reading the Bible. Here are some 25 facts about the person of the person of Joseph in the book of Genesis. Number 1, the historical accounts of Joseph are found in Genesis chapters 30 through 50. 20 full chapters dedicated to this man, and so he's a very important person in the book of Genesis. Joseph is an important character because he helps us understand how the Jews got to Egypt, and then about 300 years later, after they were placed in bondage, they were delivered by Moses, and then they eventually ended up sometime later in the Holy Land. It can be shown that Joseph's father was Jacob, and Jacob was 91 years old when Joseph was born. 91 years old. Can you imagine that? Joseph's mother was Rachel, and later Rachel had one more son named Benjamin, with whom she died in childbirth. All the other brothers of Joseph were half-brothers by other wives that Jacob had. Joseph was a favorite son of Jacob because he had loved his mother Rachel more than his other wives. Jacob made a coat of many colors for Joseph. The Hebrew word for coat, however, means a long-sleeve tunic. Those with long-sleeve garments did not work in the hot and sweaty fields, so there's some indication here that Joseph maybe was a pretty spoiled child. Later, Joseph had two strange dreams. These dreams are recorded for us in Genesis chapter 37. His half-brothers despised those dreams and plotted to kill Joseph when they could. Later, his half-brothers sold Joseph into slavery, and the slave traders took Joseph all the way to Egypt and then sold him to Potiphar, who was the officer of Pharaoh's house. Joseph was the house manager over Potiphar's estate. Later, some terrible lies by Potiphar's wife were told, and later they threw Joseph into prison because of those lies. And while in prison, however, God still blessed Joseph, and so Joseph became a supervisor within the prison. It seemed like everywhere Joseph went, he did his best to adjust to the situation, and God blessed him for that. Joseph also knew how to interpret and understand dreams. Back in Bible times, God used a method of dreams to tell people unique things. I don't believe he does that today because we have the full Bible at our disposal. Read the Bible and you'll get all the information about God that God intends you to have. But Joseph knew how to interpret and understand dreams. Later, Pharaoh cast his butler and baker into prison, and both had dreams. Joseph accurately interpreted both dreams. And then later, Pharaoh had two strange dreams. In one dream, he saw 7 fat cows grazing by the river. Then 7 skinny cows came and ate them up. He also saw this dream. There was a corn stalk with 7 ears of corn, and then another stalk came by with 7 thin ears and blasted the good stalk. Now, the strange dreams disturbed Pharaoh, and there was no one around that could interpret them. The butler, however, his dream had been fulfilled. He was released from prison and placed back in his former occupation within Pharaoh's household. He remembered that Joseph properly interpreted his dream, and so requested that they get Joseph out of prison to help the Pharaoh with his dream. So Joseph was released from prison, brought before Pharaoh, and he heard the 2 dreams and interpreted them. The 2 dreams taught the same thing, according to Joseph. There would be 7 years of plenty of crops growing and plenty of goodness for 7 years, followed by 7 years of famine. Joseph suggested that Pharaoh store up much grain to get ready for the 7 years of famine. Now, Pharaoh was so impressed with this young man that he promoted Joseph to a second place command within his kingdom. He would only be answerable to Pharaoh himself. See, it would be Joseph's job to build storehouses and fill them with grain to get ready for the famine when nothing could grow. Joseph got right with it and began to gather corn, and the Bible says he gathered it like the sands of the sea and stored it in selected areas throughout Egypt. So he would have had warehouse areas scattered throughout Egypt where they were storing grain, getting ready for the 7 years of famine. The 7 years of famine spread over all Egypt, but also went as far as Canaan, where Joseph's brothers and father lived. You remember his father and his brothers and his family lived all the way to Canaan land in Israel. Joseph was now in Egypt. In Canaan, Joseph sent his sons to Egypt to buy corn because he had heard that Egypt had corn. They met Joseph. When they went there, they met Joseph, who was a mighty man of power, but did not recognize him. Joseph's brothers later returned to Egypt and finally knew it was their brother Joseph who was head over the country. Joseph's brothers returned to Canaan, and their entire family moved to Egypt to meet Joseph. Later, they settled down in an area of Egypt that was very fertile, and it was called the land of Goshen. In this land, they enjoyed peace and safety and plenty and prosperity. Jacob and his large family moved to the land of Goshen about 215 years after the death of Terah, Abraham's father. So there's your time period, about 215 years later. Joseph forgave his brothers of the terrible mistreatment that they had done to him. He told them, "You did these things to hurt me, but God meant it for good." That was Joseph's outlook on life. Adversity came, but that was God helping him. Adversity is not wrong necessarily. Joseph knew that God sent him to Egypt to save the lives of many people by helping with the dreams and establishing the granaries and so forth. Now, while in Egypt, Joseph had two sons. He called them Ephraim and Manasseh. Ephraim means fruitful because God allowed Joseph to be blessed in a foreign land. Manasseh means forgetful because God helped Joseph forget all the trials he had suffered earlier in life and also in Potiphar's house and in prison before he was released to go be the assistant to Pharaoh. Now, Joseph's father Jacob passed away while they lived in Goshen. They took him back to Canaan, and he was buried with great honors and great sorrow. And I believe the Bible even says that Pharaoh went there to honor this man who had given life to Joseph. And then finally, this is the 25th fact about the life of Joseph from the book of Genesis. Joseph lived to be 110 years old and requested that his bones be transported back to Canaan to be buried with his father Jacob. Later, when Moses delivered the Jews from Egypt under Egyptian bondage, Joseph's bones were taken and buried in Canaan. So this has been 25 and probably even more unique facts about the person Joseph in the book of Genesis. Thank you for joining us. Come back again. If you have a topic, email it to us, and we'll do some research and present more facts from the Bible. This has been the Bible Information Station. God bless.